was frustrated. I decided, well, I'll leave NASA, and I put my eyes from the moon.
At 89 years old, Charles Duke is running out of time. He's one of only 4 men still alive who walked on the moon.
A little bit closer. Okay, here we go, a big one.
And after 50 years of silence, he's finally ready to reveal what he really saw up there, what NASA overlooked, what the photographs never captured, and the confession that changed everything he believed about life, death, and what lies beyond. The voice before the walk? The year is 1969. 500 million people are glued to their television screens. The fate of 2 men hangs in the balance as they descend toward the lunar surface. Fuel is running out. 17 seconds separate triumph from catastrophe. And in mission control, one man's voice is the only lifeline between Earth and the men about to make history. That voice belonged to Charles Duke. His thick southern drawl cut through the static as he called out the final warning. 60 seconds of fuel left.
60 seconds.
Then 30. Still no landing. The tension in Houston was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Engineers held their breath. Some literally turned blue from the anxiety. Then, through the crackle of the radio, Neil Armstrong's calm words arrived. The Eagle has landed.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
And it was Duke who responded first. His now famous reply echoed around the world. He told them that Mission Control had a bunch of guys about to turn blue. They were finally breathing again.
You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
That single moment made Charles Duke part of the most historic achievement in human history. But here's the part most people forget. He wasn't on the moon that day. He was the invisible man, the voice in the background guiding giants while secretly dreaming of making the journey himself. Being Capcom for Apollo 11 was both a privilege and a torture. Every word Duke spoke was filtered through the weight of millions watching. Every pause could mean disaster. He was the emotional anchor for the mission, but he had to experience humanity's greatest leap from the wrong side of the glass. Duke later admitted that watching Armstrong and Aldrin touch down felt like being a father watching his children take their first steps. Proud, yes, but also desperate to be there himself. What most people don't realize is that no other astronaut in history has had this dual perspective. Duke was both the guardian who talked Apollo 11 safely to the surface, and later, the explorer who walked on that same alien world himself. 3 years after guiding Armstrong's descent, Duke got his chance. Apollo 16 launched in April 1972, and at just 36 years old, Charles Duke became the youngest human being to ever set foot on the moon. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. What Duke saw up there didn't match the simulations. It didn't match the data. It didn't even match what Armstrong and Aldrin had described years before. The moon revealed things to him that have haunted him for more than 50 years. And now, at 89 years old, Charles Duke is finally ready to talk. What he really saw? When Charles Duke finally stepped out of the lunar module on April 20th, 1972, he thought he knew exactly what to expect. He had spent 2 years training for this moment. He had studied every photograph, memorized every data point, listened to every debriefing from the astronauts who came before him. None of it prepared him for what hit his eyes. The first thing that struck him wasn't the surface beneath his boots. It was the sky above his helmet, or rather, the complete absence of it. Imagine standing outside on the darkest night you've ever experienced. Now, strip away every single star. Remove even the faintest hint of glow. Erase any suggestion that an atmosphere exists at all. What Duke saw above him wasn't just darkness. It was a void so absolute, so infinite, that it felt like staring into oblivion itself. He later called it an incredible contrast, the blackest black imaginable pressed against the blinding brightness of the lunar surface. No gradient, no transition, just two extremes locked in an eternal standoff. And here's what Duke wants people to understand. The photographs lied to you. Every image you've ever seen of the moon flattened something that was overwhelming in person. Cameras couldn't balance that range. The human eye could barely process it. Every boulder looked like it had been carved with a razor. Every shadow cut across the ground like a line of pure ink. There was no softness anywhere. No gentle fade from light to dark. Just brutal, absolute contrast. Duke spent decades trying to explain this to people. The moon wasn't the gray, dusty wasteland the photos suggested. In person, it was harsh, alien, beautiful in a way that felt almost aggressive. But that wasn't even the biggest shock. Here's something that will challenge everything you think you know about the Apollo missions. When Duke landed at the Descartes Highlands, he couldn't see Earth. Let that sink in for a moment. The most iconic image we associate with moon exploration is the famous Earthrise, that breathtaking photograph of our blue marble hanging over a barren lunar horizon. We assume every astronaut spent hours gazing at our home planet, overwhelmed by its fragile beauty suspended in the void. Charles Duke never had that view. From where Apollo 16 landed, Earth was positioned directly overhead. And when Duke tried to look up, all he saw was the inside of his own helmet. The suit that kept him alive also blocked the very sight that defined what we imagine the lunar experience to be. He explained it bluntly. Looking straight up meant looking at the opaque part of the helmet. The most poetic image in pop culture simply didn't exist for him during those moonwalks. Think about what that means. We've built an entire mythology around astronauts staring at Earth from the lunar surface, contemplating humanity's place in the cosmos. But for Duke, that romantic vision was physically impossible without contorting his body in ways the stiff suit wouldn't allow. This is exactly why he's speaking out now. He wants people to know the truth, not the myth. The moon wasn't a glossy postcard. It wasn't a spiritual retreat. It was one of the most hostile environments a human being has ever entered, made navigable only by technology that simultaneously protected and imprisoned its wearer. The helmet itself turned exploration into a battle. With a field of view like a fishbowl, Duke could see forward, but almost nothing else.
In Apollo, you're looking at the top of your helmet because it's like being in a fishbowl. So we didn't ever see the moon, the Earth from the moon.
Peripheral vision was gone. To survey a ridge or examine a crater, he had to twist his entire body. The panoramic sweeps you see in documentaries took physical effort that the films never show. And yet, even within those brutal limitations, something else hit him. Something that cameras and data couldn't capture. Duke described standing on the lunar surface and realizing, for the first time in his life, how utterly alien this place was. It wasn't another desert. It wasn't another mountaintop. It was an environment that operated by completely different rules. An environment that didn't care whether he existed at all. The silence was part of it. Without an atmosphere, there was no sound beyond what existed inside his suit. No wind and distant rumble, nothing. Just the rhythm of his own breathing and the hum of his life support system. When he cut the communications, the silence became absolute.
And fly high and straight and land soft.
He later said it was like being wrapped in a cocoon of nothingness. The light was another part. On Earth, light scatters through the atmosphere. It softens. It creates the blue sky we take for granted. On the moon, sunlight arrived raw and unfiltered. It didn't illuminate the landscape so much as assault it. The brightness on the ground was almost painful, while the shadows remained impenetrably dark. Duke admitted that standing there, surrounded by that stark contrast, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just another adventure. This was a glimpse of what exists beyond the thin shell of protection our planet provides. And that glimpse would change everything about how he understood his place in the universe. But the moon wasn't done revealing its secrets. What happened next would stay with Duke for the rest of his life. A moment so terrifying that he's never forgotten the sound of his own heart pounding inside that helmet. A moment when the youngest man to walk on the moon came within seconds of never walking again. The moment he almost died. It was the final day on the lunar surface. After nearly 70 hours on the moon, Duke and John Young were wrapping up their last moonwalk. The mission had been a triumph. 16 miles in the rover, hundreds of pounds of samples, experiments that would reshape lunar science. But with just minutes left before climbing back into the lunar module, they decided to have a little fun. It was 1972. The Munich Olympics were happening back on Earth, so the two astronauts came up with an idea. They would hold their own Moon Olympics. In 1/6 gravity, a man weighing 360 pounds in his spacesuit would feel like 60. That meant jumping higher than any human ever had. Young went first, about 2 feet 3 inches. Not bad, but Duke wanted to go bigger. What happened next became the most terrifying moment of his life. He launched himself upward, nearly 4 feet off the surface. For a split second, it must have felt incredible. The youngest man on the moon, flying through the void. Then physics reminded him where he was. The problem was the backpack. The primary life support system contained everything keeping him alive. Oxygen, power, cooling, communications. The only barrier between him and instant death. That backpack weighed as much as he did. When he straightened mid-jump, his center of gravity shifted backward. He started falling the wrong way. In slow motion, Duke felt himself rotating. He had time to realize what was happening. Time to understand he was about to land on the one thing that couldn't survive impact. If the fiberglass cracked, he was dead. If a tank ruptured, he was dead. No hospital on the moon. No second chances. Duke twisted desperately. He landed on his right side instead of flat on his back. The impact bounced him onto his backpack anyway, but the angle distributed the force. He lay there, heart pounding inside his helmet, listening for the hiss of escaping oxygen. Nothing. The backpack held. Young walked over and looked down. His response became legendary. He simply said, "That wasn't very smart." Duke just asked for help getting up, then went quiet. The Moon Olympics ended right there. Duke now talks about it as a lesson. The moon taught him that humans aren't built for that environment. We're guests in a place that will kill us the moment we forget how vulnerable we are. That lesson stayed with him, but what nearly destroyed him wasn't up there in the void. It was waiting back home. A family on the moon. For 2 years leading up to Apollo 16, Charles Duke was barely home. Every Sunday night, he kissed his wife Dottie and 2 young sons goodbye, then flew to Kennedy Space Center for 5 straight days of training.
Our families lived in Houston, but we trained in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center.
Week after week, month after month, the same empty chair at the dinner table. His oldest son, Charles III, had just turned 7. Thomas was only 5. They were growing up with a father who existed mostly as a voice on the phone. Duke knew the cost his family was paying for his dream, and somewhere in those long months, he made a decision that would become one of the most human moments in space exploration history. He was going to take his family to the moon. Duke asked NASA for permission to bring a family photograph and leave it on the lunar surface. To his surprise, they approved. A NASA photographer captured the portrait.
And I can take that pictures of the moon. So they thought that would really be neat. So we got one of the NASA photographers to come over, and we got dressed up in our and we got in our backyard.
Dottie and Charles in the back, their two sons in front. A simple family photo. The kind you'd find in any American home, but this one was going somewhere no family portrait had ever gone. Duke encased it in plastic and wrote a message on the back. This is the family of astronaut Duke from planet Earth. Landed on the moon, April 1972. Each family member signed it and pressed their thumbprint onto the plastic. On the final moonwalk, with minutes remaining, Duke placed the photograph gently onto the lunar dust. Then he captured one of the most remarkable images in history. His boot print visible inches away from his family's faces, 240,000 miles from home. For over 50 years, that photograph has remained exactly where he left it. But time on the moon is cruel. Temperatures swing from 400 degrees to nearly absolute zero. That cycle has repeated hundreds of times. The plastic has certainly cracked. Ultraviolet radiation has likely bleached the image white. Duke believes his family's faces have faded to nothing.
44 years of cosmic radiation. It's all faded away now, I'm sure. But it was enough to take it at the time, and it was good enough.
And yet, something remains. The object itself still rests on another world. For Duke, the meaning was never about permanence. It was about the gesture. He wanted his sons to know he carried them with him. The moon wasn't an escape from his family. It was an extension of it. But when he returned to Earth, that gesture of love would stand in painful contrast to what was happening inside his home. The hero was about to face his greatest challenge. The forgotten mission. Ask anyone to name an Apollo mission. You'll hear the same answers every time. Apollo 11, the first moon landing. Apollo 13, the miraculous rescue. Maybe Apollo 17, the final footprints. But Apollo 16? Most people draw a blank. That silence has haunted Charles Duke for more than 50 years. Because here's what history overlooks. In terms of pure science, Apollo 16 was one of the most important missions NASA ever flew. It just had the misfortune of happening after the novelty wore off and before the dramatic finale. Duke and John Young explored a region no human had ever seen up close. The Descartes Highlands, rugged mountainous terrain that scientists believed held the key to understanding how the moon formed. Every previous landing touched down on flat lunar seas. Apollo 16 was different, like landing in the Rocky Mountains instead of a beach. The terrain was rougher, the elevation higher, the complexity far greater. And what they found changed everything. Scientists expected volcanic rocks from ancient lunar eruptions. The textbooks were already half-written. They were completely wrong. The rocks weren't volcanic. They were breccias. Fragments shattered, melted, and fused by countless asteroid impacts over billions of years. The highlands weren't volcanoes. They were scars of cosmic violence. That discovery forced scientists to rewrite lunar geology. It changed how we understand not just the moon, but our entire solar system's early history. Duke and Young collected 209 pounds of samples, some of the most geologically diverse material ever retrieved. Laboratories are still analyzing pieces Duke carried home in 1972. They deployed seismometers, heat flow experiments, cosmic ray detectors. They carried spectrometers that mapped iron, titanium, and magnesium across the lunar surface. They set up humanity's first telescope on another world. 16 miles of driving, 20 hours of moonwalks, discoveries that reshaped planetary science. Yet documentaries always show the same clips. Armstrong's boot, Aldrin's salute. Apollo 16 barely gets a mention. Duke feels that sting. His mission lacked Apollo 13's drama. It wasn't first or last. Excellence became invisible because there was no crisis. But he refuses to let it be forgotten. He's given talks, pushed for museum exhibits, made it his cause to ensure future generations understand Apollo was about science, not just flags and footprints. Because if a mission this significant can be forgotten, what happens when people claim it never happened at all? The confession. No one expected. Charles Duke came home from the moon as a hero. Ticker tape parades, magazine covers, invitations from around the world. His name was etched into history. His future seemed limitless. Within months, he was miserable. The high of walking on another world faded faster than anyone expected. Duke volunteered for the backup crew of Apollo 17, hoping for one more chance. But the primary crew stayed healthy. He never flew again. Apollo ended, and something inside Duke began to crumble. He threw himself into business. He made money. He achieved success by every external measure. But behind closed doors, the man who conquered the moon was failing at what mattered most. His marriage was falling apart. His relationship with his sons had grown distant. Dottie sank into depression. The family that smiled from that photograph on the lunar surface was fracturing. Duke later admitted the painful truth. Walking on the moon didn't change who he was inside. It didn't make him a better husband or father. Fame wasn't enough. Fortune wasn't enough. A place in history wasn't enough. He had traveled farther from Earth than almost any human alive, and he had never felt more lost. This is the confession Duke has carried for decades. Then, in 1975, Dottie attended a weekend church event and came home different. The depression lifted. Peace settled over her. Duke watched his wife transform. Sadness gave way to joy. Bitterness gave way to forgiveness. He was skeptical. Church had always been routine. He knew about God the way you know historical figures. A name. Nothing personal. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. 2.5 years later, Duke attended a Bible study. Something shifted. For the first time, faith became a question that demanded an answer. On a spring day in 1978, exactly 6 years after walking on the moon, he surrendered his life to Jesus Christ. Everything changed. The emptiness began to fill. The dying marriage started to heal. The distance from his sons began to close. Duke and Dottie have since traveled the world sharing their story. His favorite line has become his motto. Walking on the moon was great, but walking with Jesus is better. And anyone can do that. He had to lose everything he thought mattered before finding what actually did. And now, in his late 80s, one final mission remains. Racing against time. 12 human beings have walked on the moon. Only 4 are still alive. And Duke, the youngest of them all, is now 89 years old. The clock has never stopped ticking. He's spoken openly about this in recent interviews. Not with fear, but with urgency. When his generation is gone, Apollo will shift from living memory into pure history. There will be no one left who can describe the silence, the stark beauty, the overwhelming alienness of standing on another world. That's why Duke is still traveling, still speaking, still showing up at museums and schools and conferences around the globe. He wants to pass on what he saw before the chance disappears forever. But there's another battle he never expected to fight. He has to defend the fact that Apollo actually happened. Duke has stood face to face with people who tell him the moon landings were faked. Conspiracy theorists who believe it was all filmed on a soundstage. He doesn't lose his temper. He just looks them in the eye and says 4 simple words. "Sir, I was there." That's authority no YouTube video can match. No viral conspiracy can erase. But the deniers frustrate him deeply. Not because his ego is wounded, because when someone denies Apollo, they're erasing the sacrifice, the risk, the men who climbed into rockets knowing they might never come home, the engineers who worked through the night, the families who waited by the phone. So Duke fights back with evidence, the 1/6 gravity, the unfiltered sunlight, the 800 pounds of lunar rocks sitting in laboratories worldwide. Rocks that no conspiracy could manufacture. He's also looking forward. He's excited about Artemis. He sees it as a continuation of everything Apollo started. In his view, the moon was never the destination. It was always a stepping stone toward Mars and beyond. And that brings us to the message Charles Duke wants to leave behind. He has walked on another world. He has nearly died in the void of space. He has watched his marriage crumble and be restored. He has found a faith that filled the emptiness success never could. The moon was just the beginning. Apollo wasn't the final chapter. It was the prologue. Now the question passes to us. Will we take the next giant leap? Charles Duke believes we will, because for a man who walked on the moon, the journey never really ends. The moon was never the end. It was always just the beginning. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.